Being the Prime Minister of this nation is the hardest job in this country. You have to be incredibly resilient, but you have to have incredible self-belief.
It is not easy, and you don't realise how hard it is till you're up close to it.
There were a lot of opportunities that were squandered.
It was clear that it was not the end of the matter.
In effect, he had lied to his cabinet.
But you must have been furious at the time.
No, I was shocked. We shouldn't be doing this.
He had this instinctive response of, you're stacking the party room.
As soon as you've got leaks coming out of Cabinet, you've got a problem.
It was a mistake that neither Tony nor Malcolm could just be happy with the job that they had.
Is the Liberal Party doomed?
No.
The most important relationship that any party leader has, and most particularly a Prime Minister, is with the people he or she immediately leads.
The successful candidate was Scott Morrison.
This is my leader. And I'm ambitious for him.
Yeah, good on you. Thanks, ScoMo.
I'm just not going to play the Canberra games.
Political parties exist for one reason alone. That is, of course, to exercise political power. To be successful, the Liberal Party needs to convince most of us that it's best for the country. If you want to know how the Liberal Party works and what went wrong with its most recent stint in power, you'd talk to party elder John Howard. Apart from the Liberal Party founder, Robert Menzies, no one has served longer as Prime Minister. Three Prime Ministers, Tony Abbott, Malcolm Turnbull, Scott Morrison. Who was the better?
They each had qualities. I thought Tony Abbott did a wonderful job in bringing us back into government after such a short period of time and restoring order to our border protection policy. I thought Malcolm Turnbull's capacity to argue the economic case was very, very good. And I thought Scott Morrison's performance in 2019, a miracle.
I have always believed in miracles.
Was quite outstanding, so I'm not going to attempt doing that because I don't think it's possible. Thank you.
Gather round, gather round.
Very nice to meet you.
Thank you.
John Howard can still pull a crowd. So too can this man. The former and current leaders teaming up to launch a book about the future of the Liberal Party.
We focus on the things which unite us, on family, on community, on duty and pride in our country.
For Peter Dutton, the next chapter will be the toughest, returning his party to power.
We'll have policies of consequence designed to have wide appeal to many Australians.
I want to get your big picture summary to start off with. The coalition, obviously 2013 to 2022, almost a decade of government. How would you assess it?
Messy. It was definitely messy. People tried their best, but there just wasn't a thread of unity and support for the overall cause that there was in the Howard government.
Mr Speaker, to the chagrin of a few and the joy of many, maybe even some in this place, I'm retiring from the Australian Parliament.
Before retiring from politics, Christopher Pyne had spent more than half of his life as the member for Sturt.
It's time to put the people first, second and third, and politics last, ladies and gentlemen.
On the outer in the Howard years, he was a central player in both the Abbott and Turnbull governments.
There wasn't a sense of support or unity, a golden thread, if you like, of somebody has to be the leader and we just all have to sort of suck it up and do our jobs. That didn't happen.
Why not?
Well, because other people wanted the leader's job and they couldn't subsume their own ambition in the common cause.
While Tony Abbott's publicly supporting Mr Turnbull, privately he's joined the dissenters, possibly as an alternative leader.
Tony's expressed a number of views, each of which is at odds with the view he expressed before.
What's your view of Tony Abbott and Malcolm Turnbull as men?
Two bulls in the same paddock. Very different characters, but obviously deep enmity between them.
Morning. Morning. How are you?
Before serving as Scott Morrison's deputy, Josh Frydenberg was a trusted minister under Abbott and Turnbull. You worked effectively with both of them.
I did.
Do you trust both of them?
I work very effectively with both of them. I like both of them and I can trust them.
Neither of them trusts the other, right?
Well, that's pretty obvious.
This is the Liberal Party room where, in sitting weeks, all the MPs come together to debate legislation, thrash out policy behind closed doors. And all too often, when there are leadership ructions and leadership challenges, this is where it all comes to a head. After John Howard, Brendan Nelson became leader. He was torn down by Malcolm Turnbull. Then, in this room in 2009, Tony Abbott took the leadership from Malcolm Turnbull by 1 vote.
The final ballot was won by Tony Abbott, 42 votes to 41.
I am feeling a bit overwhelmed.
Will you run for leadership again? So can you see yourself, Malcolm Turnbull, as a leadership contender at any point in the future?
Look, I'm not going to speculate on any of that. The only thing I want to be, as far as the future is concerned, is that there will not be a by-election in Wentworth, assuming there isn't a bus waiting round the corner to get me when I leave the Parliament. But yes, tread carefully.
Soon, however, Turnbull declared that he would quit politics altogether. Then he had second thoughts.
He said that he'd begun to regret it. He sought my advice, and I said, Malcolm, if you feel that way, then why don't you change your mind, publicly cancel your resignation?
And I'm sure John Howard did that because he thought we needed to have a spare. And that if Tony Abbott didn't work out, and he's a great supporter of Tony Abbott, so we all know that, he thought Malcolm is actually a great man and we need a spare if it all goes wrong. And it all went wrong and we had the spare.
Tony Abbott said to me before the 2013 election when we discussed this, he said to me, mate, I've seen what happened to Rudd and Gillard, and I can assure you, we'll run an effective, stable government. Tony believed that, of course. He was very sincere, and he recognised that had to happen. Well, it didn't.
Australians elected the federal coalition to office with a thumping majority.
6 years on from losing power, and after Labor's Kevin Rudd, Julia Gillard and Rudd returns chaos, the coalition was back in office.
I can inform you that the Government of Australia has changed for just the second.
Tell us about that night when Tony Abbott claimed a landslide victory in 2013.
Well, firstly, I was elated. I was elated.
It was a landslide. Tony Abbott led the coalition to a 14-seat majority.
You obviously enjoyed hearing it, so let me say it again. The Government of Australia has changed.
Tony had done an extraordinary job as opposition leader. The most effective, if not more effective, leader, I think, from opposition since Malcolm Fraser. Few more indefatigable, few more relentless than Tony, and always fighting. And, you know, that was the nature of opposition, and still is.
And I can inform you that the Australian Labor Party's vote is at the lowest level in more than 100 years.
Lindsay and Lingiari, these are all seats the coalition has picked up tonight.
The 2013 campaign really was around 3 words which came out of the party platform. Hope, reward and opportunity. Hope for the future, reward for hard work and an opportunity for all.
When you think of the hope on the night of that initial victory, were those hopes quickly dashed?
I don't think they were quickly dashed.
The Prime Minister didn't make it till the next election.
No, he didn't. No, he didn't.
The two big personalities were always going to be a problem. Malcolm Turnbull was never going to play second fiddle to anyone. He was always going to be looking for the opportunity when he could take on Tony Abbott, of course, but Tony Abbott was the one that opened the door for him.
In the final moments of the election campaign, Abbott summarised his promises.
No cuts to education, no cuts to health, no change to pensions, no change to the GST, and no cuts to the ABC or SBS.
Little more than 24 hours later, he'd won and was pledging to be a man of his word.
A government that says what it means and means what it says.
But his first budget with Treasurer Joe Hockey in 2014 included cuts and shake-ups in crucial areas like health, public broadcasting and taxation.
There's a new petrol tax, there's a new doctor's tax, new taxes on medicines, new taxes on going to the hospital.
We have taken a hit because it was necessary for our country. If that means some short-term damage for us, so be it.
Come on, guys.
Politics, Chris, is the art of the possible. 2014 budget was mission impossible.
The catastrophe for him was the 2014 budget, where he broke a slew of promises.
Veteran journalist Chris Uhlmann has spent most of his career covering Canberra politics.
In that budget, he again made the federal government the problem and drew an enormous target around himself. And from that point on, Malcolm Turnbull had an opportunity at some stage to take him if there were more mistakes. And unfortunately, Chris, there were so many more mistakes.
But there were significant achievements. Free trade deals with South Korea, Japan and China. The carbon tax was axed and order was restored to our maritime borders. The man charged with stopping the boats was Scott Morrison.
We're not going to be intimidated by the weakness of the Greens or the double-mindedness and hypocrisy of the Labor Party. We're not going to be intimidated by any violence that occurs in any centres anywhere or at sea. Our policies are working, Madam Speaker. They are stopping the boats and our resolve is absolute.
You come in, you're the hard man, you're hated by the media and the left for doing this job, but what you do in government is stop the boats, therefore saving lives, and get people out of detention.
And the Labor Party now adopt it fully as policy and admit they got it wrong. I was thrilled that we were able to achieve the humanity goal of putting an end to this vile trade, but I'm also pleased that the argument was won, I hope, for all time.
Australia Day 2015, and the country woke to news about a surprise gong.
On the day that the Conservatives would love to celebrate, Australia Day, on the 26th of January, someone lobbed a giant turd into the punch bowl and ruined it for everybody.
Abbott had brought back knighthoods in 2014, but on this day, his captain's call handed the honour to the Queen's husband, Prince Philip.
Prince Philip has been a great servant of Australia.
I actually liked the knighthoods till we decided to make Prince Philip one. Everybody waking up going, oh man, what did we just do? How do I answer that one on the telly today?
In the words of a coalition insider, not only do his colleagues see this as evidence that the PM is out of touch, Mr Abbott seems to have a death wish. Other comments from inside the coalition included, he's nuts, this is just stupid, and it's hard to bugger up Australia Day, but he's done his best.
It was shocking. Can I tell you what happened to me?
Absolutely.
Because I was happy, right? So I love Australia Day because you get to see a lot of constituents.
Happy Australia Day!
So I was really looking forward to it. Got the news radio on and I hear that the Prime Minister has appointed the Duke of Edinburgh as a Knight of the Realm. And I won't say what I said, but it starts with F. I thought, oh, F. This is going to be a catastrophic day. Because what a terrible thing to do. And of course, it ruined the day.
Is it an embarrassing decision that we've opted for a Brit?
Enjoy today. I couldn't understand what the benefit was. The Queen may well have been grateful for that, but it's not as though Prince Philip didn't have a chest full of gongs already. So it was just a really bad moment. And that was my moment too.
Now CEO of the Laundry Association of Australia, Luke Simpkins can't remove the stains of 2015, when he was the Liberal member for Cowan in Western Australia.
After so much disappointment through the budget period of 2014, where we seem to have lost our way, and then this, I said, this can't be right. You know, what's going on here? What do you guys think? That really was the moment where I no longer had faith in Tony Abbott as a leader.
Was that the moment where many voters lost faith in him as well?
It certainly seemed. That's what people were saying.
You were trained by Jesuits, so you'd be familiar with a particular examen. So in good conscience, Are you the best person to lead this government and prosecute its agenda? And have you considered resigning?
Yes and no. Yes and no, Chris. Now, let me make it absolutely crystal clear. We were elected in 2013 because the Australian people rejected chaos, and we are not going to take them back to that chaos. We really are not going to take them back to that chaos.
But that Abbott pledge was about to be broken for him. Within weeks of Australia Day, Luke Simpkins and fellow WA Liberal Don Randall called for a leadership spill, prompting a phone call from the Prime Minister.
He's obviously agitated, a little bit unhappy, but he wasn't angry. He didn't yell or anything like that. But he told me I was doing the wrong thing for the country and that I was destabilising the government and the country.
So what was the point of a spill motion without a challenger?
Well, I seriously thought we could get the numbers. And I thought that if we could shake it enough to get the leadership position spilled, then it would be enough for someone to stand up.
But no one did. It was a leadership spill without a challenger. So again, they came into this Liberal Party room, 100 MPs. And Tony Abbott, as the Liberal leader, the Prime Minister of the nation, suffered the humiliation of having to have those 100 people vote between him and an empty chair. And the empty chair got 39 votes.
The result is very clear. Noes 61, yes 39.
Now this matter is behind us.
Turnbull was very clever at this point.
Good morning. Good to see you.
Turnbull did not declare. If he had declared, he wouldn't have won, Abbott would have won, and Turnbull then would have had to have gone to the back bench. So Turnbull played that very, very cleverly.
Did Tony Abbott become isolated from his own party?
I believe he did. People couldn't get to him when they wanted to. That Peter was always there as the gatekeeper and always managed everything that went through.
Peter is Peter Credlin, now my Sky News colleague, then Tony Abbott's longtime Chief of Staff.
She was fantastic, and there's no question about that. But when you become the Prime Minister of the country, you're expected to step up and be the Prime Minister and not be seen by colleagues as being manipulated, if you like, or being struggling to make the decisions without the support of your senior officer. So
You're saying that Tony Abbott couldn't make decisions without Peter Credlin?
He struggled. He needed her. She was very much part of him and his decision-making process. There's no question about it. She played a very significant role.
A role in the rise, obviously. What role did she play then in the fall?
Well, you know, I mean, she has to accept some responsibility there because, you know, there were colleagues that were quite disgruntled by what was happening, and I'm sure it played a role in their decision to vote against him.
Tony needed someone strong at his shoulder because Tony is a very exuberant character and he's such a good guy, but he needed a tempering force at times. And I think Peter Credlin, as role of Chief of Staff, did that too, sort of like turn down the volume when it had to be turned down.
So Peter Credlin helped his prime ministership?
Yeah, definitely.
Broken election promises, a captain's call on Prince Philip, and the empty chair vote, which he described as a near-death experience. The pugilist Prime Minister, a one-time Oxford boxing blue, was on the ropes.
I've listened, I've learned, I am determined to do better.
There were too many people in the party room that didn't like Tony. And there were a couple of catastrophic decisions which caused, you know, a good third of the party room to decide they weren't on the Tony Abbott bus. And one of those was not giving the party room a conscience vote on same-sex marriage.
Abbott's election promise to hold a national plebiscite on same-sex marriage was blocked in the Senate. So many in his party were looking for another way.
We set up the Parliamentary Friendship Group for the LGBTI community, and first in the world.
Veteran Queensland MP Warren Ench, a long-time advocate for marriage equality, wanted a conscience vote. In August 2015, he raised the matter privately with Tony Abbott.
One Sunday evening I said, I've got to do it, we're running out of time. And he said he had to go to his to cabinet colleagues to get approval. And he said, I'll let you know tomorrow. Well, on the Monday, well, I didn't hear from him. And then on the Tuesday, I got the heads up, and so I went in and I raised it.
It was raised by Warren. I stood up immediately.
On the 11th of August, Liberal and Nationals MPs began a regular meeting. It became a gay marriage marathon.
I knew this would be incendiary. So I got up and said, well, this is the first we've heard this is coming on. Nobody knew this was going to be raised.
And then I was attacked by quite a number of senior ministers, actually, who accused me of hijacking the party room. And I said, but I got approval from the Prime Minister. Christopher Pyne said, well, that's not true. We just walked over from the Prime Minister's office with him and we actually asked the question.
And Warren was really furious that I'd said no one knew this was going to be raised. So he beetled around the back of the room and showed me his mobile phone, where he'd sent the message to Tony, and Tony had said, go for it, mate, or something like that.
You've got the text message that disproves that.
And what I did, and I believe that this played a role in him losing his leadership. This is the 11th of August 2015. And Warren, I said I'd get back to you re-SSM. As you know, I'd prefer it never come up, but if it must, I suppose today's party room would be as good as any. Cheers, Tony. And I immediately responded, thanks, mate, I really appreciate your cooperation. Best regards, Warren. So, you know, there's no question about it. And when I showed that text to his senior colleagues, they were furious because, in effect, he had lied to his cabinet.
But you must have been furious at the time.
No, I was shocked. This is kind of completely off the rails now, you know. We shouldn't be doing this.
This was when many party room vows of fidelity to Tony Abbott were broken. His days as Prime Minister were numbered.
For him to make a decision like that and not bring Christopher into the tent, I think was Tony's biggest mistake. I think that was his biggest mistake of everything, to have not done that. And I don't see it that Christopher undermined Tony. I see it more that Christopher, from that point, just stepped aside and let the damn wall break.
I met with the Prime Minister.
Everyone knew that Malcolm was ambitious.
And advised him that I would be challenging him for the leadership of the Liberal Party.
Politics is not that complicated.
Insert expletive here.
It's we're right, they're wrong.
I'm just not going to play the Canberra games.
Good morning. What's this dipstick up to?
Was Malcolm Turnbull being treacherous?
I've listened, I've learned, and I've changed, and the government will change with me. I am determined to do better.
Tony Abbott was fighting to stop the rot.
How long have you got to lift your game?
Well, that's a matter for the backbench.
Once you start leadership challenges, you're not sure where they end up. They create a lot of disquiet, they create a lot of distrust, and obviously they can cause a lot of division as well.
I know my front benches. I trust my front benches. I've worked for a long time with all of them. I'm not someone who runs around demanding pledges of loyalty.
Perhaps he should have, because before his very eyes, loyalties were being tested. Did Malcolm Turnbull or any of his supporters ever try to recruit you?
Oh, look, when you arrive in the Parliament, everyone wants to be your friend. I mean, I'd heard these terrible stories about how dreadful politicians were to each other, but I was struck by how friendly everybody was.
Because they all wanted your vote.
Because everyone wanted you on their side.
My question is to the Prime Minister.
Angus Taylor was a rookie MP elected at the 2013 landslide.
I don't think there was a lot Tony could have done in hindsight after that initial spill. I mean, I think the truth was that it had its own momentum and it was hard to stop.
I'm just not going to play the Canberra games.
There were broken promises. There was the difficulty with the 2014 budget. All that was bubbling along. Malcolm Turnbull was in Cabinet. Was he leaking against his own government?
I have no evidence for that, so I don't know.
Were there leaks?
Yes, there were. It was quite a leaky cabinet.
Well, I think when I look back on it now, as soon as you've got leaks coming out of Cabinet, you've got a problem.
The people who are responsible for the leaks have not been identified. And some people would say that the Prime Minister's office was leaking. because they wanted to get certain outcomes, right? Now, I don't have any evidence for that either. The Prime Minister's office would say that, you know, Malcolm was leaking or his supporters were leaking, but I don't have any evidence for that. I mean, the problem with this is you never get to the bottom of who leaked what.
We are not Labor, and this Game of Thrones circus, which the Labor Party gave us, is never going to be reproduced by this coalition, by this Liberal National coalition.
Despite Abbott's desperate assurances and hopes, the internal rebellion was festering away.
Everyone knew that Malcolm was ambitious, that he wanted to be Prime Minister. Of course he was going to be looking at what the opportunities were for him to again put himself forward.
Malcolm Turnbull seized his opportunity in September 2015.
There was a very strong focus on what the polling was showing, the results of the various news polls that were coming through. Whilst that is important, it should never have been the overriding concern that it was and that it became.
Just over 2 years into his term as Prime Minister, Abbott had lost 30 consecutive news polls.
Can the Prime Minister nominate a single person sitting behind him who thinks he's the best possible Prime Minister?
Tony and I had a gin and tonic on the Sunday night at the Adelaide Club. I can say that now because I don't need to seek re-election. And he said to me, do you think, you know, there'll be a challenge this week? And I said, no, I don't. I don't think so. I mean, I think people are unhappy, but I don't sense there's any, you know, momentum for a challenge. I was wrong.
A little while ago, I met with the Prime Minister and advised him that I would be challenging him for the leadership of the Liberal Party. And I asked him to arrange or facilitate a meeting of the party room to enable a leadership ballot to be held.
So do you know what I did? I did my job, but I locked my door of my internal office. I thought I've been through enough of these, and I'm sick of them. It's going to be bad.
I have consulted with many colleagues, many Australians, many of our supporters in every walk of life. And this course of action has been urged on me by many people over a long period of time.
And it was over within 24 hours.
This time, Tony Abbott received 44 votes, but Malcolm Turnbull took 54. The people in this room had not only changed the leadership of the Liberal Party, they'd changed the Prime Ministership of the nation.
The King is dead. Long live the King.
What did you think?
Insert expletive here. Devastated. It's not what we were elected to do. It's devastated. I knew it was coming. I knew, but gutted.
I, Malcolm Bligh Turnbull, do swear that I will well and truly serve the people of Australia in the office of Prime Minister.
Was Malcolm Turnbull being treacherous?
If you challenge a leader, obviously you're not being supportive of them.
How are you feeling this morning?
For his part, Malcolm Turnbull feigned surprise at becoming the new Prime Minister.
This is a turn of events I did not expect, I have to tell you, but it's one that I'm privileged to undertake and one that I'm certainly up to.
What is your message to the Australian public?
This is a great time to seize the day. I'm filled with optimism.
Did Malcolm Turnbull destroy the opportunity to have another period of stable coalition government?
No, I don't believe so. He was elected leader. He took that responsibility seriously.
Did a lot of those MPs who supported him know what they were doing? Some of them hadn't been around when he was opposition leader and I was working for him.
That's the personalities, that's the looking back, that's the hindsight. I look back and I remember the positive contribution Malcolm made. He was an idiosyncratic personality. He was mercurial on his good days.
There's some good words.
And he had some bad days. Of course he did. We all do.
And for the man Turnbull deposed, it was a terrible day.
The nature of politics has changed in the past decade. We have more polls and more commentary than ever before. Mostly sour, bitter, character assassination. Poll-driven panic has produced a revolving door prime ministership, which can't be good for our country. And a febrile media culture has developed that rewards treachery.
Was the fatal moment then in that decade the overthrow of Tony Abbott? Did the coalition just need to stick with the leader who'd won the way to government?
No matter what. I think that's absolutely the case. It is, even if he was a dud that got rolled after 3 years, the one promise that you made to the Australian people is we're not going to be like them. And think of this extraordinary statistic, the fact that you've got to wait until Scott Morrison, until you get a Prime Minister after John Howard, that's elected at one election and takes a party to the next election. That is a ridiculous indictment on the political class that we ever got to that stage.
Have these leadership shenanigans meant that the voting public's become more mercurial?
Oh, look, I think that the federal political class has completely let down the Australian people.
There was certainly an element of that, and for those of us who are involved, you know, we bear those scars.
One of the key Team Turnbull conspirators was Queensland Senator James McGrath. You were described as the chief bedwetter.
I've been called worse, often by members of my own family.
Do you regret backing Turnbull, knifing Tony Abbott?
I do regret backing Malcolm Turnbull, and I feel sorry for Malcolm Turnbull that he fails to understand that the trust that was put in him by the party membership, not just in Queensland, but across Australia, that he failed to understand that trust, and that he has actually returned that trust with his continuing acts of disloyalty to the party, and more importantly, to the members of the party.
We owe a great debt to Tony Abbott. We thank him for his leadership. We thank him for his service. He is a great Australian.
How would you describe Malcolm Turnbull's contribution to the Liberal Party and the country?
Underwhelming. And he certainly didn't fulfil his potential as Prime Minister. And, you know, his disastrous decision to go to an early, you know, and then to go to a double dissolution was the wrong decision. And I think, you know, the Australian public made that very clear in the election results.
Good luck. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
9 months after ousting Tony Abbott, Turnbull called a double dissolution election. And it was an extended campaign.
How are you?
55 days, the second longest in Australian history.
There we go.
What did you think of that 2016 campaign?
Well, I thought that 2016 was a very disappointing result, but the campaign was too long. You've always got to have a program. You've always got to have something different about the future. Now, I don't think we had that in 2016.
Malcolm is a great man and has achieved a lot of things, but he does sometimes overcomplicate the situation. Politics is not that complicated. It's we're right, they're wrong.
There is one thing for sure. The Labor Party is back.
Although the final results wouldn't be known for several days,
here comes the crusher.
The coalition's 14-seat majority was being shredded.
This is a recipe for instability.
When I look at this whole period of Liberal government, the turning point, the pivot point, is the 2016 election.
Paul Kelly is editor-at-large for the Australian newspaper.
Turnbull is shocked. He is profoundly shocked by this result. And this leads to this extraordinary event on election night. I was at the Wentworth Sheraton Hotel that night where the Liberal Party was. They were all waiting for Turnbull to appear. Turnbull is at home and he's waiting. He's waiting to get the results. And he keeps being told, it'll be clear soon, it'll be clear soon. In other words, our win will be clear. And of course, it's never quite clear.
At the close of counting, the coalition had won 76 seats. It was enough to hold power, but with a wafer-thin majority. Just one seat.
So by this stage, it's about midnight, and eventually he has to go to the hotel. He arrives too late, too unhappy. One of the paradoxes is he's won the election, but he acts as though he's lost the election.
Based on the advice I have from the party officials, we can have every confidence that we will form a coalition majority government in the next parliament.
It was an extraordinary night for Turnbull because it was his win, but the shock of the very, very narrow nature of that win left him very, very distraught, very upset and looking to blame other people.
The Labor Party ran some of the most systematic, well-funded lies ever peddled in Australian politics.
But as we all say, this sort of brutality often happens in Australian politics. The government mishandled this Labor attack. I mean, they completely underestimated the magnitude of the attack and the damage it was actually doing.
Good morning. Good to see you.
The Turnbull government ended up losing 14 seats.
Do you remain confident in your leadership?
Quite frankly, I think he should quit. He's taken this nation to an election on the basis of stability. He's delivered instability. The bloke is not up to the job.
Turnbull's authority is profoundly weakened in the party. In a sense, he never recovers. And what happens is the Turnbull opponents in the party, the Abbott forces, the Conservatives, are strengthened against Turnbull.
Today is not a day for speculation, it's a day for taking stock.
It's not the end of the world, and people shouldn't start slitting their throats.
Was Malcolm Turnbull shocked that he wasn't so electorally popular?
Well, it appeared that way, didn't it? But what was clear is that that campaign had focused on issues that weren't the issues that mattered to the voters who got us over the line in 2013 and were going to give us a clear win in 2016. We didn't have that.
Turnbull had no choice publicly but to cop it on the chin.
Leaders lead. We have found the result disappointing. We accept the verdict of the people. I take full responsibility for the campaign, as a leader should.
Now, elections are never easy, and when you win them, you celebrate them. When you lose them, well, you lick your wounds and you go away and you work how to win the next one. So a win's a win, and he bagged it.
Perhaps he should have sounded like a winner on election night because it perhaps wasn't a good way to start a term.
Well, you know, that is a fair commentary.
The report card on Malcolm Turnbull as Prime Minister does, of course, have some positives. There were tax cuts for individuals and for businesses. Same-sex marriage finally got the go-ahead. And, of course, there was China. In many respects, Malcolm Turnbull led the Western world in standing up to China, don't you think?
Yes, I agree with that. You know, Malcolm certainly laid down the early tracks on that. There's no doubt about that.
Madam Speaker, the President of the People's Republic of China.
In 2014, it was a coup for Prime Minister Abbott to welcome President Xi Jinping to Australia.
It is said that when friends meet, 1,000 cups of wine cannot contain their happiness.
3 years later, China's strategic posture had changed.
The Prime Minister.
And Prime Minister Turnbull was pushing back.
Today I'm introducing legislation to counter the threat of foreign states exerting improper influence over our system of government and our political landscape.
Foreign interference laws were world-leading.
Turnbull also banned Chinese-owned telco giant Huawei from building Australia's 5G network.
I can tell you, we didn't labour over it. We ended up going, hand-wringing over it.
You had good intel.
We had good instincts. It was backed up by the intel, totally.
You knew there'd be blowback.
Of course there was going to be blowback. I mean, but this was the whole thing about standing up to China. People weren't doing it. No one said no. Australia said no. And we stood up to China and we followed through. Again, sovereignty, Chris. It's the theme of our government.
It might be the strongest theme through Abbott, Turnbull, Morrison.
I agree.
That is this muscularity in foreign policy.
Well, muscularity, assertiveness definitely, but just an instinctive and passionate belief in Australia's sovereignty and Australia's national interests. And that comes first.
And another thing the three Prime Ministers had in common, they all made captain's calls. In Malcolm Turnbull's case, it was his so-called infamous Bonk ban. You never get along with Turnbull.
Oh, I did at the start. That's the weirdest thing, you know. This is the craziest thing. At the start, I got along very well with him. And in fact, people used to say we would almost finish each other's sentences.
Barnaby and I and our colleagues have to work harder.
Early in 2018, the relationship between the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister developed irreconcilable differences.
Barnaby made a shocking error of judgment.
I remember watching it on television.
In having an affair with a young woman working in his office.
And then going to the louvers, opening, and went, what's this dipstick up to?
The Prime Minister was reacting to revelations the married, socially conservative Barnaby Joyce was in a relationship with his former media advisor, Vicky Campion, and she was pregnant. Turnbull was having none of it.
Ministers, regardless of whether they are married or single, must not engage in sexual relations with their staff.
I went straight round to confront him about it into his room, and Scott Morrison walked out of the door.
And he took a principled stand on this, and it was the right stand. I mean, ministers shouldn't have sex with their staff. They shouldn't.
But in announcing that policy, wasn't he sealing the fate of Barnaby Joyce?
No, he was doing the right thing.
Mr. Speaker, the Deputy Prime Minister will be taking leave from Monday, the 19th of February.
For Labor, this was manna from heaven.
Shocking error of judgment, truly deficient. Inept, humiliation.
Pull the scab off for everybody to have a look at.
He has to consider his own position.
Was the Bonk ban an effort to force you out?
Yes, of course. And I remember saying to Peter Dutton, look, at the moment I'm gone as Deputy Prime Minister, Turnbull will be gone within 3 months. And this is an incredibly bombastic, egotistical statement, but it's the truth. When he lost me, he lost.
You've been wounded, Prime Minister. Do you want to speak?
It was like killing a man with a garden stake on the footpath, trying to take out Malcolm Turnbull.
This is my leader.
Yeah, good on you. Thanks, ScoMo.
If he wants to know who we are, let's remind him of his own treachery.
I will not stand as a candidate in the ballot.
He failed his own test.
He failed his own test.
Did you consider putting your hand up?
Absolutely not. No, no.
One policy thread has hurt the Liberals over many decades, especially under Tony Abbott and Malcolm Turnbull. Climate and energy policy has hurt the party on many levels. Sometimes it's been a tug of war, sometimes an open battle, sometimes it's been used as an issue of political revenge. In 2018, with his National Energy Guarantee, or NEG, Malcolm Turnbull was putting climate and energy policy on the line again. Could you see that it was going to cost Malcolm Turnbull his leadership?
Well, I think there were other factors at play. There were people, certainly, who wanted to bring down Malcolm Turnbull, and they would have used any opportunity to do so.
In September 2015, Malcolm Turnbull used Newspoll as a weapon to undercut Tony Abbott.
We have lost 30 news polls in a row. It is clear that the people have made up their mind about Mr. Abbott's leadership.
By April 2018, Turnbull had reached the same inglorious tally. With the Newspoll promise, with the Newspoll paradigm, he was hoist on his own petard, wasn't he?
Well, he set up that test. Certainly many commentators pointed that out.
He failed his own test.
He failed his own test.
It was unhelpful. But, of course, it was a self-fulfilling prophecy, of course, because the people who were anti-Turnbull in the government, all they needed to do was keep making sure we never had any breaks so they could keep the news poll suppressed, which is exactly what they did.
Let's talk again of a leadership challenge. Are you part of that?
Nope. Nope. From time to time, I might challenge the government to rethink things, but the last thing I want to see is instability in the government.
This time, a challenge was looming not from Tony Abbott, but from a member of Turnbull's own front bench, Peter Dutton.
Look, right from the start, I never harboured animosity toward Malcolm at all. This was never sort of a Rudd-Gillard, Abbott-Turnbull type relationship. I did all I could to make sure that his Prime Ministership succeeded.
He is a member of our team. He has given me his absolute support.
This was a bad Monday for the Prime Minister. The polls were down again, and his own MPs were threatening to cross the floor to vote against his climate and energy policy.
Now, it is clear that in the absence of bipartisan support of the National Energy Guarantee, will not be able to pass the House of Representatives.
That night, Turnbull decided to try to preempt any leadership challenge. by pulling a surprise spill himself at the regular party room meeting the next morning. Were you given a heads up on that morning, or were you surprised in the party room?
I was totally surprised in the party room. I couldn't believe it.
Malcolm takes his seat in amongst the colleagues rather than being up the front. The returning officer calls for nominations for the leadership. Please stand if you'd like to contest. Malcolm Turnbull, of course, immediately stands, and there's a long pause. Eventually, Peter Dutton stood equally.
Turnbull's ploy worked for the day. He prevailed over Peter Dutton by what might have been an unlucky 13 votes.
Have you been wounded, Prime Minister? Do you want to speak?
This was an overwhelming vote of support for the Prime Minister.
Did you consider putting your hand up
Absolutely
then?
not. No, no.
Not even for a millisecond? You
No.
think I could put up my hand here?
No. Never entered my mind. In fact, that's the first time everyone's ever asked me that, to be honest. Just no.
So your immediate instinct was, I've got to lock in here behind the Prime Minister, no matter I think this is a crazy move?
Absolutely. I was his treasurer. And a friend.
This is my leader.
There you go.
And I'm ambitious for him.
Yeah, good on you. Thanks, Como.
But elsewhere, support for Turnbull was in freefall, with a growing number of frontbenchers quitting the ministry.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As I'm sure honourable members are aware, the Minister for Home Affairs has resigned from the ministry. I want to thank him for his service.
Can you guarantee that you will not launch a leadership challenge before the next election?
Well, look, again, just in terms of colleagues, I'm very grateful for the support that they've provided.
And straight away, Peter Dutton started gathering forces for a second challenge that week. Malcolm Turnbull demanded to have 43 signatures on a piece of paper. Was that fair play?
That was my idea, and it was a good idea.
I now await a letter with the signatures of a majority of the party room.
Was it fair play, though?
Absolutely it was. I've spent the morning with the Prime Minister and the evening with the Prime Minister, and I am 100% supportive of the Prime Minister. These people apparently had the numbers. They just had a ballot on the Tuesday morning. It was one of the most amateur-hour operations I'd ever seen in my life. It was like killing a man with a garden stake on the footpath, trying to take out Malcolm Turnbull. I'd seen some very precise leadership challenges. This was one of the least precise.
But it wasn't a challenge. Malcolm Turnbull had brought it on.
Yes, he did. I think that was a mistake to have the vote on the Tuesday morning.
The Prime Ministership was falling down around Malcolm Turnbull, wasn't it?
Well, he'd asked the question and people were answering the question, and enough people were giving a very clear answer that this was a big challenge for him.
It has been an extraordinary spectacle of disunity, of division, of personal hatred.
We've got this spectacle, this disgrace. You should be ashamed of yourselves.
For Malcolm Turnbull, the hammer blow came when the triumvirate of Michaelia Cash, Mitch Fifield and Matthias Cormann resigned together.
With great sadness and a heavy heart that we went to see the Prime Minister yesterday afternoon to advise him that he no longer enjoyed the support of a majority of members in the Liberal Party party room.
But the list of signatories against the Prime Minister was still shy of the required 43. And it was Thursday, the last sitting day, and MPs were soon to go home. Scott Morrison proposed this as a lifeline for Malcolm Turnbull.
Let everybody go home, go and face their electorates, feel the unhappiness at the instability, and let's regroup and come back here in a couple of weeks. So let's go home. And Christopher thought, that's an interesting idea. But Malcolm decided to see what happened by the following morning and said, if the signatures all came in, then he'd call the meeting. Now, I actually don't think he got the credit he deserved for doing that. That was an honourable thing to do.
And that Friday's dawn brought the 43rd signature. It belonged to Warren Ench, a great mate of Brendan Nelson, the former Liberal leader deposed by Malcolm Turnbull way back in 2008. It was an incredible call to demand to have those 43 names.
Arrogant, and 43. So I said, look, I'm going to do a deal with you. If you want my signature, I'm happy to give it to you, but it will only be number 43. Only 43. They were a little bit puzzled, but I said, it's not negotiable. You must come to me when you've got 42 signatures, and I'll give you 43. They did. And that's when I wrote for Brendan Nelson, because I thought if he wants to know who we are, let's remind him of his own treachery. And that's, and, you know, when it came out, I got a fabulous call from Brendan, and he was quite touched by it. You know, he felt that, you know, at least now people had an idea, you know, Malcolm getting a bit of his own.
Faced with the signatures of a majority, Turnbull had no option but to allow a spill and step aside.
I will not stand as a candidate in the ballot.
In the first ballot, there were 3 names: Peter Dutton, Scott Morrison and Julie Bishop. The Deputy Liberal leader polled only 11 votes. So then there was a two-way contest.
Malcolm Turnbull just emerging from the room with Julie Bishop by his side. The outgoing Prime Minister and Deputy Liberal leader.
A ballot conducted in the party room for the leadership of the Liberal Party. The successful candidate was Scott Morrison, and he won this vote by 45 votes to 40 for Peter Dutton.
How did Scott Morrison come through and win?
I think he played it very well. Once that match had been lit.
Did you vote for him?
I did. I don't think that there was anyone else at the time who was capable of uniting us in a way that he did, somewhat unexpectedly, but he did. And I don't think anybody else in that circumstance could have done it.
They wanted to bring the government down. They wanted to bring my prime ministership down, and while, you know, the consequence is that I'm no longer PM, of course, instead of Mr Dutton being Prime Minister, we'll no doubt in due course we'll have Mr Morrison.
Malcolm could charm the socks off a beggar. Then they have the torturous bad, which is getting into that rut they all get into where they forget they're the Prime Minister, think they're the President, and then they think they're they're there to reign for life and will enter into no discussions. Then their coterie of friends becomes smaller and smaller and smaller, and they listen too much to too few people, and they become paranoid, and then they become distracted, and then they become ineffectual. And that's what happened to Malcolm.
One thing you've got to say about Malcolm, and I don't mean this unkindly, I mean, he doesn't lack self-belief. It was just on this occasion he pulled the wrong rein. He used to have this saying, often wrong and never uncertain. Now, I wouldn't say he was often wrong, but he was sometimes wrong, but he was never uncertain.
Is the Liberal Party doomed?
No. I think its future is bright.
Self-belief can be a trap.
Is there a cultural problem at Parliament House?
Absolutely.
This was monstrously politicised, but that's politics.
Every good political hit job needs a villain.
Why has this minister so failed?
It's not about who you voted for in leadership ballots?
Well, of course it is. Of course it is.
Did you lie to him?
No, absolutely not.
It completely and utterly derailed the Morrison government.
Our climate has changed.
If what we're doing isn't working, we will change.
You don't win anything back by embracing the other person's policy.
History and the future are completely beyond our control.
You don't simply sit on your hands and say, we'll wait. That would be their central mistake.
You know, I don't hold a hose, mate.
He needs to resign and he needs to leave Parliament.
This has been government by deception.
You think he lied to you? I don't think. I know.
Weaponisation of these types of things is quite despicable. It really is.
This is the Shire, south of Sydney. Classic, white bread, lucky Middle Australia. And home to Australia's 30th Prime Minister, the daggy dad and proud of it, Scott Morrison. Unlike Tony Abbott or Malcolm Turnbull, Morrison would be able to survive 3 years from one election to the next. But first, he had to win over enough mainstream voters. Tell us why you won that election in 2019.
I think people genuinely wanted to keep the economic and security agenda and plan that was giving them a sense of confidence going. So there was that. But it wasn't only that, of course. A very large part of it was that they rejected absolutely what Bill Shorten and the Labor Party were putting forward.
Labor has a different view about what creates a strong economy. What creates a strong economy is fairness and decency.
Not answering the question, Mr. Shorten.
Oh, OK. I'm going to give someone else a go.
Answer the question. When can people know? When can people know, Mr. Shorten, the cost of the economy? You didn't answer the question.
Do you know what, John? I'm going to go to the
No,
next
you should
person.
answer the question. That's why we're here to ask questions, and you're not answering the question. When can people expect to know, Mr. Shorten, the cost of the economy?
They pulled the kimono right back, and the Australian people did not like what they saw. In many ways, we're seeing that same agenda now being imposed, this time by stealth. That's the only lesson the Labor Party learnt, was to not tell anybody.
Against all the odds, just months on from shambolic leadership turmoil, Scott Morrison won a victory few thought possible.
I have always believed in miracles.
When he came to the leadership, we were disunited, we were demoralised. I don't think we had any great belief that we could or would win the next election, but he showed great leadership. He said, "Follow me and I will lead you to victory."
Did you believe that at the time?
I wanted to.
Morrison proved to be a relentless campaigner, a daggy dad mustering the votes of the quiet Australians.
That has the PM's endorsement as the best ballot I have seen.
He spoke in a way that people understood, and I think that is really a big part of the success in 2019. There's no doubt, had Malcolm led us to the election in 2019, we would have lost very badly. So I think the party room was vindicated in its decision in the end.
Morrison's achievement over that 8 or 9 months in recovering and winning that election was remarkable.
Anyone remember Pac-Man? You know that little thing that just goes around gobbling up like that? That's Bill Shorten's tax policy.
He waged a really effective negative campaign against the Labor Party and against Bill Shorten and against Labor's tax policies, and it worked. But Morrison's judgment at that point in terms of winning that election was judgment of a very high order.
We are an amazing country of amazing people. God bless Australia.
It did take a miracle to win that election. It was a statement of the obvious, I think, in many respects, but it had another meaning. It was a way for me to say thank you, but to honour God and the victory.
So you really believe it was an actual miracle that God helped you do this?
Just because you have a religious faith doesn't mean God goes and does all the work for you. That's not what I mean. I was just giving thanks. That's how I'd describe it. I was just giving thanks.
Scott Morrison's political honeymoon came to an abrupt end in 2019.
No, you're an idiot, mate. You really are.
As the Black Summer bushfires were starting to take hold, the PM, without a public announcement, snuck away with his family for a Hawaiian holiday.
And at the time we left, we had made sure that arrangements were in place to deal with what was happening at the time. But this was monstrously politicised.
Media mockery turned to fire-victim fury.
This is not fair. We're totally forgotten about down here.
At Blackened Cobargo in southern New South Wales.
I don't see Kirribilli burning after the fireworks.
Tired. Oh, I don't really want to shake my hand. Okay, tell that fellow I'm really sorry, John. No, he's fine. I'm sure he's just tired. No, he's off the house.
I accept that people would have felt disappointed about that, and I get that. But equally, the way it was accelerated, the way it was exploited, was quite vicious. It was quite personal. And that was allowed to happen and sanctioned, I have no doubt, at the very top of the Labor Party.
He made the decision, and it's a matter for his judgment when he goes on holiday.
They know that, I don't hold a hose, mate, and I don't sit in the control room. No. That's the brave people who do that are doing that job, but I know that Australians would want me back at this time.
You stated the obvious that you don't hold a hose. Do you regret that?
I regret that phrase. and how it was then placed, yeah, of course I do. It was a careless phrase. You know, you had to be so careful. Every phrase would be deployed in this narrative. But, you know, that's politics. It's a rough business. It's a brutal business. But having said that, I'm not going to pretend it wasn't brutal. I'm not going to pretend that it wasn't orchestrated, that it wasn't intentional, that things like natural disasters weren't exploited for political purposes or pandemics for that matter. They were and ruthlessly. But that's politics.
Was there secrecy involved, though? Why wasn't there an announcement that you were going on leave and there was an acting Prime Minister in place?
That was the fair criticism, I think. And to be honest, that was a bit of a mystery to me how that all occurred.
One thing I would say is that once you've decided to do something that might be a bit controversial, you've got to be open about it. And people are entitled to know when the Prime Minister's on leave.
By far the biggest challenge of Morrison's term was something invisible to the naked eye. A virus escaped from China, rampant around the world, disrupting travel, trade and normal life. COVID-19 and the once-in-a-lifetime pandemic changed everything, absolutely everything.
I just lost 3 jobs, hospitality industry and jewellery. Partner's just lost his business. It all blows up in 24 hours.
Australia, like the rest of the world, was entering uncharted waters.
Being the Prime Minister of this nation is the hardest job in this country. Where his leadership deserves to be recognised is particularly in his relationships with global leaders, but we also owe him a great debt of gratitude in terms of how he led during COVID.
He was criticised early on for preventing Chinese visitors.
He was, but he was right. Few other leaders globally had the courage to do what he did.
For anyone other than Australian citizens, Australian residents, dependents, legal guardians or spouses, then you will not be permitted entry into Australia. I'll never forget that day. It was actually the day our dear friends Danny and Layla Abdallah and Bridget Saker lost their kids in that terrible accident over in Oatlands. Same day. Sorry.
You didn't know them at the time, did you? You came to know them because of that tragedy.
Yep. Hang on.
It was the 1st of February 2020, and Danny and Layla Abdallah lost 3 of their children, Angelina, Sienna and Anthony, and their niece Veronique, mown down on the footpath by a speeding, drunk and drug-fuelled driver.
I'm sorry about that, Chris. That was a bit unexpected. It just triggered.
I'm glad you just it triggered the memory for me, not only of the tragedy, but of the friendship you've made with those people. I can still remember seeing her on camera talking about forgiveness the day after, and it's just incredible.
It's pretty amazing.
I don't hate him. I think in my heart I forgive him.
Faced with unimaginable tragedy, the Abdullahs chose to forgive the driver.
They had every right to be furious. They had every right to be vindictive. They had every right to lash out, and they chose a different path. And I know why they did, because we share that faith.
While much of Australia dealt with lockdowns, border closures and brutal restrictions, the Morrison government was also dealing with an increasingly belligerent China, flexing its muscle in the Indo-Pacific. How did you conceive of the Aukus arrangement, and how was it delivered?
Well, it started as a very practical issue, and the practical issue was a submarine program which was not going to do the job we needed it to do anymore. I mean, the strategic environment in the Indo-Pacific had dramatically shifted in such a short time. And the delivery on the contract that we had entered into was proving challenging.
That contract was a $90 billion deal with the French company Naval Group for diesel-electric subs. Nuclear submarines have been the best submarines for well over 50 years, yet successive Australian governments thought it was just impossible How did the Morrison government make the impossible dream of nuclear submarines a reality?
Very early on in my tenure, it was very apparent that the French contract was not going well.
Linda Reynolds served as Defence Minister for 2 years in the Morrison government.
There were design delays, there were cost blowouts, there was serious cultural differences in terms of how we do business and manage projects and how the French companies do. But it became obvious to myself and to Scott at some point that we needed to start having a look at other options.
That's when Scott Morrison, in deep secrecy, began examining the nuclear option.
In the middle of COVID, we were doing that. Managing COVID early hours of the morning to late at night, and we were running this at the same time. And over the course of the year, we learnt that because of the new technology they had, it meant you didn't have to service the reactor midlife, which meant you no longer needed a civil nuclear capability to be able to run these boats. That was a game changer.
Well, good morning from Australia. I'm very pleased to join two great friends of freedom and of Australia, Prime Minister Johnson and President Biden.
Aukus was a Morrison initiative. It came from Morrison. It didn't come from anyone else. It came from him personally. He got Boris Johnson on board first, and then Morrison and Boris Johnson got Joe Biden on board.
Today, we join our nations in a next-generation partnership, built on a strong foundation of proven trust.
I think that AUKUS is undoubtedly Scott Morrison's greatest achievement. I mean, I had a wry smile watching the coverage of the Labor Party conference where all these powerful speeches were made about how fundamental AUKUS was to our future. Well, it was conceived by Scott Morrison. Now, let me acknowledge that from the get-go, the Labor Party supported it, and I give them credit for that. It was the right thing to do.
And I want to thank that fellow down under. Thank you very much, pal. Appreciate it, Mr. Prime Minister.
Let it be remembered, as Joe Biden, in a very stumbling fashion, said that fella from down under. That fella from down under, Scott Morrison, did conceive it, did develop it, and it was clearly his relationship with Boris Johnson and Joe Biden. And it's interesting that Joe Biden's the only one of the three that's left in power.
Now, obviously, the deal to go with French submarines was a mistake.
I thought that was a mistake at the time.
To proceed with the AUKUS Pact, Australia had to kiss off the French deal. The fallout was ugly.
I have a lot of respect for your country. I have a lot of respect and a lot of friendship for your people. I just say when we have respect, you have to be true and you have to behave in line and consistently with this value.
You think he lied to you?
I don't think. I know.
Did Scott Morrison have to lie to Emmanuel Macron?
I don't believe that he did.
Did you lie to him?
No, absolutely not. I made it very clear that we were looking at other options.
So he's been dishonest?
Well, I think he has his take on it, and that was convenient to his position. The ultimate difference that we had was this. They wanted a contract. We wanted to defend our national security. Those two things no longer aligned. Did that cause some problems? Yeah, it did. And I'm pleased they're patching that up. But we've got AUKUS, and that's what mattered.
Australia's pandemic response created enough problems for government that were up front at the time. Businesses and borders closed, jobs on hold, freedoms curbed, vaccines mandated. But one of the strangest responses was secret, not revealed until much later. Morrison had sworn himself in as a veritable one-man cabinet.
The problem with Scott Morrison, he probably did a little bit too much homework. And as became apparent, he started to want to also become the president and had too much of a say in what was other people's dung heaps and should have stayed away from that.
This has been government by deception, government in secret.
In 2020 and 2021, the Prime Minister had himself sworn in to 5 additional portfolios, a solo super ministry of subterfuge.
We were close colleagues, different people, but close colleagues.
Despite their close working relationship, even sharing digs at the lodge during the pandemic, Morrison never mentioned to his deputy that he'd secretly appointed himself to administer Treasury. Do you regret not telling Josh Frydenberg and others that you'd assumed their ministerial powers?
Yeah, I do. And I've said that to Josh in particular. Yes, I do. And certainly in the case of his, and certainly in the case of Karen's with Home Affairs, they were, I regret those decisions entirely to do it.
Appalling. And I wish I'd never had to say what I did, but I don't regret it.
Karen Andrews was the Minister for Home Affairs at the time.
He needs to resign and he needs to leave Parliament. They're my views. That's what I think he should do. Look, I was very clear at the time that the secret ministries were being disclosed that Scott Morrison should resign from Parliament. And the reason that I said that, and I do stand by that, but I haven't changed my view, is because I thought it diminished the Liberal Party. It diminished Scott Morrison. It was absolutely the wrong thing to do.
It was unnecessary, wasn't it?
In hindsight, yes. Hindsight's a lovely thing when you're in the pandemic.
If you thought it was necessary at the time, then it would have been acceptable, surely, to your cabinet colleagues and the public if you just made it public and explained why.
I wish I'd spoken to Josh, but I thought that would have been disruptive. You're not going to get every call right, and I particularly regret the impact it had on Josh and Karen. We had good personal working relationships, and I let them down on those two things.
I think Morrison's sense of self-belief is really important, but self-belief can be a trap. So it worked brilliantly for Morrison in late 2018, early 2019, winning the 2019 election, but it did become a big trap for him later on as Prime Minister. He became very stubborn, he was reluctant to change.
I know Australians know that I can be a bit of a bulldozer when it comes to issues.
This sense of self-belief that he had in 2022 about his capacity to win the election, that became self-defeating.
The Liberals' review into their devastating 2022 election loss contains some harsh realities. Female voters abandoned the Liberal Party in their droves. Of the 30 seats around the country with the highest proportion of professional women voters, the Liberals did hold 15. Now they hold only 3. So what's the problem with the Liberal Party and women?
I'm pleased to inform you that Mr Abbott was sworn in by the Governor-General as Prime Minister of Australia at 10:25 a.m.
In 2013, Tony Abbott unveiled his first cabinet. Just one woman made the cut, Julie Bishop.
You look back and you go, well, that probably was the start of it. And if different decisions had been made back in 2013 with who was appointed into cabinet and we had built on that, then maybe the narrative that was formed by Labor would not have been able to have been made and would certainly have not developed.
I present your new ministers, and through you, I present to the people of Australia their new government.
Well, you look back now on those early decisions of the Abbott government. How could they have got it so wrong?
Tony, we need you to put up a bomb.
Tony Abbott gave you name recognition in the most unusual way.
Yes, he did. Yeah.
One-term Liberal MP Fiona Scott now busies herself with bees, hives and sometimes regrets about the 2013 election campaign moment that left an unexpected sting. Was that a horrible moment?
Oh, it was awkward. It was really awkward.
On the trail in Western Sydney, Tony Abbott was asked about similarities between former member Jackie Kelly and the new candidate by his side.
They're young, they're feisty. I think I can probably say have a bit of sex appeal.
I think it was just a brain fart by Tony and he just misspoke. And I don't think it was anything. I think he was actually trying to be charming and nice about it, but I think it was then it got a life of its own where other people used it in bad ways.
They have a bit of sex appeal.
It's a silly comment, but I'm not sure post, Me Too and where we're at, you probably would have even got elected saying something like that now.
There's a theme that you could talk about with the Liberals in power, and it starts with Tony Abbott. It goes through Malcolm Turnbull dealing with Barnaby Joyce and the Bonk ban, and then Scott Morrison, again, a problem with women and the Brittany Higgins case in particular.
Not far from here, such marches, even now, are being met with bullets, but not here in this country, Mr. Speaker.
To what extent is this an ongoing problem for the Liberal Party, and to what extent is it something that's just weaponised against them by their political opponents?
Well, it's easily weaponised when it continues to happen, and it's easily weaponised when, these things haven't been dealt with continually.
I've put up with a lot as a woman in politics. Police charged a creepy old man with stalking me.
Nicole Flint is another former Liberal MP. She chose to turn her back on politics, trading stints in Canberra for working spells on the family farm in South Australia. Hard work, but nowhere near as tough as being branded a Conservative woman by Get Up and others in the 2019 campaign.
What we hadn't seen before, and I sincerely hope we never see again, was the influence of Get Up, because I became one of the 7 target MPs around the nation that they decided they would put their full resources into getting rid of.
How did that change life for you?
Dramatically.
A breaking point came when Nicole's campaign office was vandalised. The political attack was now brutally and offensively personal.
The horrific sexist vandalism of my office was completely demoralising.
What did they write on your office?
A skank, blow and go, $60 an hour.
Sexist abuse in public place. How did you feel as a woman dealing with that?
Oh, traumatised. No, Chris, I felt really unsafe. And I also felt really angry and frustrated because I am fiercely independent. I'm from the country. I'm very capable. We're very no-nonsense, It's just wrong.
Did your political opponents stand up for you? Did you get any support from Labor calling this stuff off?
Of course not. No.
What about from your own side?
No.
Did Liberal politicians do enough to support you?
More could have been done.
Is there a cultural problem at Parliament House?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Men on the left, some of whom are public figures of influence, have done the following. They've stalked me, suggested I should be strangled, criticised the clothes I wear and the way I look, called me a whiny little bitch repeatedly. I didn't feel safe doing my job anymore in the manner in which I felt I needed to do it because things had been so weaponised against me. To the left, to Get Up, Labor and the unions, the left-leaning media, you know exactly who you are. You need to finally show some leadership and put a stop to this sort of behaviour. If they don't, well, they're not really leaders then, are they?
And it was not only female Conservative MPs who were caught up in the murky world of sex and politics in Canberra. Some of their male colleagues were caught in the crosshairs.
Tonight on Four Corners, we go inside the Canberra bubble with an investigation that questions the conduct of some of the most senior politicians in the nation.
Liberal Party ministers like Christian Porter and Alan Tudge.
I made a mistake myself in getting involved with Miller in 2017.
Rochelle Miller was Alan Tudge's media advisor. In 2017, they had an affair.
We were both adults in our 40s, we were both married and had children, and it shouldn't have happened, so I take responsibility for that. Was it subsequently weaponised many years down the track? Undoubtedly. But ultimately, I made the mistake in the first instance, which I take responsibility for.
4 years later, Miller made allegations against Tudge in the media.
I felt someone kicking me on the side of my hip and leg as I tried to sit up in bed. It was the minister. Then I realised I was completely naked. He continued to kick me until I fell off the side of the bed and ended up on the floor.
An inquiry later found no evidence of abuse, but after Labor won office, the government paid Miller $650,000 in a workplace settlement for alleged hurt, distress and humiliation. Do you believe that there's any reason that she was owed compensation?
Well, she made allegations against me, which there was a very serious inquiry into by Vivian Tom, who's one of the most respected investigators in the country, who found no evidence against me. That's what I know, but you would have to ask the government why that payment was made.
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Turnbull.
Appearing in the Four Corners report was former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull.
There's no question that some of the most trenchant opponents of same-sex marriage, all in the name of traditional marriage, were at the same time enthusiastic practitioners of traditional adultery.
Do you believe he was out to get you and Christian Porter and Scott Morrison?
I wouldn't be Robinson Crusoe in saying that Malcolm Turnbull is a vindictive person.
Four Corners next turned the spotlight on then Attorney General Christian Porter, airing claims he raped a 16-year-old schoolgirl, now deceased, more than 30 years ago when he was 17.
The things that are being claimed to have happened did not happen.
I think it was desperately unfair on him, desperately so.
They just never happened.
For accusations to be made from 35 years ago where he couldn't defend himself. And effectively made to be guilty before having any chance to assess otherwise.
It's extraordinary, on no evidence effectively. It's extraordinary the media or the political system would allow this to happen.
Extraordinary.
Yet Malcolm Turnbull seemed to be pushing this along.
He was involved.
The former Education Minister believes he too was being targeted by Turnbull.
I think that says something about him more than it says about me.
It's not about who you voted for in leadership ballots?
Well, of course it is. Of course it is. Every single one of those people that were one of the 43 people on that list, he has in his crosshairs.
He's still going through that list?
Absolutely.
And
he will for the rest of his life, Chris.
The ABC had lynched Alan Tudge and Christian Porter. There was a pattern here.
Well, it's very clear that the 2019 election win for the Liberal Party, led by Scott Morrison, was upsetting to many. It was, in the view of some, against the natural order. Well, I don't think it was.
Weaponise is a word now often used to describe sensitive matters being publicly amplified in party political battles. In the Me Too era, in the lead up to the last election, the Labor Party weaponised gender issues.
I was raped inside Parliament House by a colleague, and for so long it felt like the people around me only cared because of where it happened and what it might mean for them.
The Brittany Higgins story first came to us through the media in early 2021. This is what we know. Higgins claims fellow Liberal staffer Bruce Lerman raped her inside Linda Reynolds' Parliament House office in March 2019. Lerman denies the claim. Higgins laid a police complaint. Lerman was charged and the subsequent court case ended in chaos and the charge against Lerman was dropped. We'll most likely never know what really happened late on that Friday night, but the fallout is far-reaching.
I said this from day one in the Parliament. She never actually said to me that she was raped. Not once, ever.
Higgins maintains she did tell Reynolds about the alleged rape.
All walk together.
And within days of her going public with the allegations, Labor was sheeting it home to the then Defence Minister.
Senator Keneally.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is to the Minister for Defence, Senator Reynolds.
Leading the attack, the so-called Mean Girls, Labor senators, Christina Keneally.
Does the Minister accept that Ms. Higgins felt pressured not to proceed with her complaint to the police.
Katie Gallagher.
Just for your information, I don't think you should
Senator
hide
Gallagher,
behind Ms Higgins
I've allowed you to make
by
your
refusing
point.
to answer these questions.
And Penny Wong.
Why has this minister so failed to meet her own standard? Why is she continuing the cover-up?
Every good political hit job needs a villain. And the truth just did not matter.
You were given a warning that this hit job was coming.
I was.
By a wonderful woman.
By an amazing woman.
That woman was Labor Senator Kimberley Kitching.
She said, "I'm so sorry, Linda, but I've got to tell you that Labor's about to rain hell on you in relation to the incident in your office a couple of years ago." She did the right thing. She did the kind thing.
I knew Kimberley. She's a wonderful woman. Was she being disloyal to her party when she did that?
I think she was following her conscience.
The Minister representing the Minister for Home Affairs, Senator Reynolds.
Labor's relentless pursuit of Linda Reynolds took its toll.
If I could ask Mr President if I could have indulgence to answer this on Monday. I think I'd be in a better position to answer this on Monday. I will... No, if you can just give me a minute. Or can I take it on notice?
Yep.
Thank you.
The whole world saw what it did to me. There is no worse thing that you can allege for any woman, that she has covered up the rape of another woman. And that's what they did day after day, and they knew it wasn't true.
Senator Wong, I really don't think we should be doing this here, but if you want me to do that...
Yes.
I was told by one of your senators 2 weeks before about what you were intending to do with the story in my office 2 weeks before.
Oh, I had no knowledge of this until...
No one had any knowledge.
Okay.
I had no knowledge of this.
How dare you?
Order. Now we will
It's all about protecting yourself.
Senator Gallagher has since admitted she did have foreknowledge of some of the Brittany Higgins allegations.
I was provided with information in the days before the allegations were first reported, and I did nothing with that information, absolutely nothing.
But she denies misleading Parliament over her knowledge of the rape claim. With Senator Wong, Gallagher maintains their questioning of Linda Reynolds was justified.
And they kept going, and then you could see the penny dropped with Penny and with Katie, and we took the discussion outside.
The penny dropped. They realised that Kimberley Kitching had warned you.
Well, they realised what I was talking about. Yep.
Some of Kimberley's friends believe all of the stress and strain of this contributed to her death. Is that what you think?
Yes.
In March 2022, Kimberley Kitching died suddenly of a heart attack. Her brief time in Parliament shrouded now by claims of bullying at the hands of colleagues.
There's a lot I could say about the unpleasantness of a cantankerous cabal, not all of them in Parliament, that was aimed at Kimber.
Did you go to Kimberley's funeral?
No.
Have you spoken to her husband?
No, I haven't.
Do you have any regrets about any of that?
Of course. I regret raising the issue, but it was self-preservation because you saw what they were doing to me and I gave them an opportunity to stop. But I had to preserve myself.
Look, this thing continues to drag on.
But you were attacked at the time. Linda Reynolds
Well, of course I was.
accused of covering up a rape inside, an alleged rape inside Parliament House.
Well, weaponisation of these types of things is quite despicable. It really is.
Because also the words that are swirling around in your head as a Liberal Party staffer at that point in time was, the Liberal Party's got a women problem. Yeah. And you were about to, you know, be the cherry on the top of the women problem cake.
Yeah, I know.
There was no issue that wouldn't be used.
Well, we know from the tapes that they were out to get you with these allegations.
We're up against not just the Labor Party. There were many more.
3 months out from the 2022 election, Scott Morrison stood in Parliament and apologised to Brittany Higgins.
I'm sorry to Ms Higgins for the terrible things that took place here. And the place that should have been a place of safety and contribution turned out to be a nightmare.
Did you see that as a slight against you?
I was devastated.
Did you not know he was going to make that apology? Tell us how it unfolded for you.
No, I didn't know he was going to do that. But again, the real damage was inflicted by Labor and the Me Too movement. And it was calculated, it was deliberate, and it was cruel.
Are you aware of how much that upset Linda Reynolds?
Yes, and we had a discussion about that, and I apologise for that to Linda.
It didn't assume that there had been a rape?
No, it did not, and still does not. I have no idea what happened that night.
But you know what happened in the politics of this issue?
Yes, I do, and I think that's becoming increasingly clear. Increasingly clear.
There were other forces at work who seriously wanted to use this as a weapon because they weren't making any inroads on the government at that stage. So they needed something to hang on to, and this became the thing, and it was tremendously successful. I mean, it completely and utterly derailed the Morrison government.
On April the 10th, 2022, Morrison called a general election.
This election is about you, no one else.
We are a great country, but we can be even better if we have a better government.
There were issues around women that were front and centre in the campaign.
Were they legitimate?
Well, they didn't have an impact. They absolutely had an impact on how the government was perceived, and they had an impact on the electorate's choice.
With the quickest results and best analysis, this is Election Night Live on Sky News.
Sky News has called it. Labor has won.
Labor went on to form a narrow majority government, but it was a disaster for the Liberals. They lost the clutch of blue ribbon seats to teal independents, delivering their worst result in half a century.
Why did you lose the election?
Because the Labor Party and their fellow travellers had been able to completely diminish my standing in the face of the public.
It was a personal political attack?
Yeah.
You put the whole election result down to Labor's attack on you personally?
I would say it was the substantive contributor. Politics is brutal. I know about more than anyone else.
I'm on South Head, Sydney Harbour. It's in Wentworth, Malcolm Turnbull's old electorate. Across there is North Head. It's in Warringah, Tony Abbott's old electorate. Conservative, moderate, with some sometimes stormy waters in between. The analogy is irresistible. Like Sydney Harbour, the Liberal Party's conservative and moderate headlands together form something greater than the sum of their two parts. Is the Liberal Party doomed?
No.
What's its future?
I think its future is bright. It's definitely a difficult time now, being out of government federally and being out of government in so many states and territories. Our state divisions are not where they should be around the country. We need to get them back to where they are, so they are effective party political fighting machine.
Are you done with politics?
Never say never.
Please welcome to the stage the man set to be the 31st Prime Minister of Australia.
Tonight, the Australian people have voted for change.
The lessons for the Liberal Party from this route are different.
I don't think we've ever seen an election like it in terms of the voter churn and the number of seats that are changing hands.
Much of the territory it's lost is blue ribbon country, now an entirely different hue.
The next member for Goldstein!
Higgins, Kooyong, Goldstein, Wentworth, North Sydney. I mean, these were the seats which were the bedrock of the Liberal Party that Robert Menzies built. And tonight, Scott Morrison has destroyed that. We have lost the bedrock of the Liberal Party.
Our climate has changed.
I think the Teals are a structural challenge. They say that the Australian public never gets it wrong, and they elected the Teals for a reason, because they didn't feel that the Liberal Party was representative of their values or who they were, and people in those communities did not see themselves in the representatives that the Liberal Party had. But they did see themselves in people like Allegra Spender.
I think what we can all see is the community movement, not only in Wentworth, but around the country.
And my question to the Liberal Party is really simple. Why did these women not join the Liberal Party? If they did, why did they leave? And the Liberal Party will know they've fixed the problem when the answer to this question is yes. If any of those women had stood for pre-selection in any of those seats, would have they got pre-selected?
Well, McKellar, all I can say is we did it!
If what we're doing isn't working, if our formula for election victory isn't getting us election victory, we will change. And the Liberal Party will work out eventually that you win elections from the centre-right or the centre-left. Anthony Albanese worked it out, he's a lefty. So if the Liberal Party thinks it can win from the right, it's going to be in opposition for a long time.
The Teal bandwagon welcomed 6 new MPs at the last election. All were women. All took Liberal seats. All sang the same duet, climate change and the women problem.
Well, I think they benefited from disillusioned votes of people who normally vote Liberal but couldn't bring themselves to vote Labor. So the Teals offered a good alternative. I mean, I live in a Teal seat now. I live in North Sydney.
John Howard tasted government and opposition in this place, Old Parliament House, Canberra. The older statesman believes the Liberal Party shouldn't overcomplicate the path back to power.
There's one thing I very strongly, publicly and privately counsel the coalition against, is this idea that you've got to have a Teal-specific approach. If you have strong policies on the economy, on national security, on family issues, you'll win the public back. And you choose good quality candidates, and when you've chosen somebody, get behind them, whether they're a man or woman or dripping wet or bone dry or whatever. With too much of this behind-the-scenes bickering about who's been chosen.
There are those in the Liberal Party who say, really, to win back the Teal seats, you've got to implement the Teal agenda on climate change and other issues.
Well, you don't win anything back by embracing the other person's policy. The last thing the Liberal Party should try and do is be Labor light.
Next door to John Howard's old seat of Bennelong is Trent Zimmerman's former electorate, North Sydney, now coloured teal. Zimmerman thinks the times, they are a-changing.
One of the major propositions of a political party is that in a parliamentary system of government, it offers stability. One of the reasons that I think that the primary votes of both parties has declined to record low levels in recent years is because the Rudd years and then the challenges that we faced internally ourselves undermine completely that central value proposition that a party brings, that it can offer the type of stability which means that we don't end up as an Italian parliament. But the other factor at play is that I think that the attitude of Australians has shifted. Australians believe that they hire the Prime Minister of the day and should be able to fire them.
So far this century, we've had more changes of leader than the Italians have.
Well, I'll never forget shortly after Scott Morrison became Prime Minister, visiting the Holocaust Memorial in Jerusalem, Yad Vashem, and we had a 70-year-old Israeli guide. He said, how's your Prime Minister going? And he said, oh, he's only been there for 3 weeks. And this guide sitting in the middle of Israel's response was, well, isn't that a long time for an Australian Prime Minister?
There is something unique about our nation and about being Australian. And I commit myself and my future government to the service of all of the Australian people. Thank you.
As Liberal leader, Howard pulled together a broad party made up of 2 key factions, the wets and the dries, or the moderates and the conservatives. Is the party too factionalised?
Factions, in my experience, the Liberal Party have become preferment cooperatives.
And that alienates the broader membership.
Well,
You've written about how people in their local...
It alienates me. I mean, I'm a classic Liberal on a lot of things, but I'm also very conservative on other things. And what's wrong with that?
And you've written about how people who join local branches then see factions imposed...
I get these stories, and I'm sure they're true because I get them a lot of branches debating whether they're going to let somebody join. I mean, years and years ago when I was, cutting my teeth on Liberal Party activity, the mantra was to go out and recruit people. And the idea of running a tape measure over their ideology before you allowed them in was ridiculous.
The Liberals have been out of favour across the country before, like when Kevin Rudd was Prime Minister. The Coalition came back from that, so how to do it again? Are you optimistic about the Liberal Party?
I'm very optimistic about the Liberal Party. We've got some work to do, particularly in terms of our divisions. We've got to get them into order, and then we've got to make sure that we fight on issues which aren't Labor light issues, but issues which are strong Liberal issues. And when you do, we can win. And I think we're seeing that actually with the Voice campaign at the moment.
Oh, don't start me on that.
When you aim high, sometimes you fall short. And tonight, we acknowledge, understand, and respect that we have.
In 2023, the Indigenous voice debate dominated. Peter Dutton's opposition was bold and risky.
I don't believe a body of 24 elites with a Canberra-based voice is going to make a difference for Indigenous people in regional and remote areas.
But he prevailed.
I think it ensures the fact that Peter Dutton will be the leader at the next election. I think that it'll be a big mistake if the Liberal Party thinks that that was a vote for them, because it clearly isn't. I fear that with the Liberal Party, it will encourage and embolden those people in groups like Advance Australia to think that their way is the right way, when in fact they've got to cobble together a coalition that has left and right and has to appeal to the Kooyongs as well as to the far-flung seats in the regions. So I think, in fact, it will be an extremely difficult time for the opposition, more so for the government, but extremely difficult for them to try and navigate what that actually means and understand that it's not a vote for them.
The next election isn't due till the first half of 2025. You're the second woman to be the Deputy Federal Liberal Leader. Could you be the first to lead the Liberal Party?
I'm very happy being the Deputy. I'm delighted to support Peter Dutton, a fellow traveller from the class of 2001, who absolutely can become Prime Minister whenever the next election is held.
The party will be led by a woman sometime, won't it?
History and the future are completely beyond our control. I'm very happy with the present and everything that I'm doing in it.
There's a good book to be written about the Liberals' latest tumultuous stint in power. Paul Kelly, our preeminent political historian, is on the case.
The worst mistake the Liberal Party can make, under Peter Dutton as leader, facing Anthony Albanese as Prime Minister, and the Labor government's got a lot of problems, the worst mistake the Liberals can make is to think the natural cycle of politics will bring them back into office, and all they've got to do is wait for Albanese to get into a lot of problems and the pendulum will automatically swing back to them. Don't believe that will necessarily happen. So you don't simply sit on your hands and say, we'll wait for Labor to lose office. That would be their central mistake.
We are an amazing country of amazing people. God bless Australia.
Typically, for the most recent Liberal Prime Minister, it's a matter of faith. And you have faith in the future of the Liberal Party?
Well, that is now a great task for the next generation and for Peter. I do, because what we're about really is about the individuals who are Australians themselves. I think this is the fundamental divide. We believe Australians can be amazing, and we just want to help them achieve that. And when they're amazing, the country's amazing. The Labor Party believes the government can be amazing. I think I'll go with the people.